All right. Good. Hey, everyone. I am very pleased to welcome my guest of honor today, Steven. How do I pronounce your last name? Sahyoun?
So you said it. You nailed it, mate. You nailed it.
Y-
That's perfect.
Really? Cool.
Yeah.
It's the. What's your background? Like your. What are your roots?
Nationality wise, okay. So my dad is from Lebanon, and my mother is from
Okay,
Slovenia.
cool. Oh, wow. That's a cool mix. So you got all the good genes from everywhere.
Not really.
Yeah.
No, I'm riddled with injuries. So
No.
I would
So that's why you became a scholar.
pretty much. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I saw you recently. So I live in Dubai. So I'm a performance coach here in Dubai. And I've been
Hmm.
following you for, I think, two to 3 years, potentially.
Yep.
I think actually the last year you really pushed your content and everything. Is that true? Last year or two?
I think I've been pushing my content since COVID, when they
Okay.
they decided to enforce the vaccines. I wasn't too happy with
Mm-hmm.
that, so I decided to take my
Yeah.
business online. I was in
Nice.
Dubai. I was in Dubai a week ago. Sorry, I just got back from Dubai 3 days ago, actually.
Yeah, I
And
saw you. Yeah, I
so
saw.
yeah, exciting news. I'm looking to transition and move to Dubai in December. Um,
Oh, amazing. That'd be
yeah,
cool to have you here.
mate, I can't
Is
wait.
there a particular reason for that?
I think my wife and I are fairly bored, and we got two kids
Oh,
now,
yeah.
and I'm looking for a
Yeah.
change. I'm looking for a challenge. I want to live in a different country. I want to explore my options out there, and perhaps work with people that really value my service face to face, not just
Mm.
online, but
Mm-hmm.
face to face. And I
Nice.
think I have a lot of value to offer and a lot of people to help out there. It's just that where we're located in Australia on the Gold Coast, there's a very low
Mm.
population, not very high income
Mm-hmm.
earners, and
Mm-hmm.
the persona around personal training and physical preparation is, not such a great reputation in terms of people really wanting to invest into that. And when I was in
Mm.
Dubai, it just opened up my eyes to how nice people are, and how there
Mm.
is how welcoming people are, like yourself, right? In Australia, we
Mm.
have a big culture around tall poppy syndrome, where people want to see you do well, but they don't want to see you
Mm.
do better than them, and that's unfortunate. And if you
Mm-hmm.
really want to grow,
Yeah.
it's not a great environment to grow in. So yeah, I'm really excited to
Mm.
transition into and
Wow.
moving to Dubai and working with people face to face.
That's amazing. That's amazing news. I'm so happy to hear that. I saw another guy that I follow who's from Australia, Ergogenic Health. I don't know if you know him.
I don't know him, no, unfortunately not.
He's like the guy. He's like into functional medicine and supplements and stuff.
No, then
Yeah, I saw that
I
he used to
definitely
live.
wouldn't follow him.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be curious to ask you your perspective on that later. That would be interesting to know your
Yeah,
perspective
for
because it seems
sure.
like you have a strong perspective with regards to that. But I saw that he was living in Sydney and he moved to Dubai recently with his family.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
A lot of people are,
yeah,
because
yeah,
in Australia, obviously, the taxes are really high, and um,
yeah, yeah.
like I said, with the culture surrounding the fitness industry and just performance in general, it's not a culture to thrive in. Even though we've got great
Mm-hmm.
coaches, and the level of coaching here
Really good coaches.
is actually a lot higher than like what I saw in Dubai. And I'm not saying that Dubai is
Absolutely.
bad. I'm just saying that
No.
what people are charging versus the quality that they're receiving, uh, would like those trainers wouldn't be able to build a business in Australia. It would be very hard for them to thrive in Australia, and you need to stand out.
Absolutely. So I'm Moroccan, my Moroccan roots, born and raised in Belgium. And when I made the move to Dubai, I realized that if I would just do the basics very well, I'm already ahead of everyone, which was
Correct.
crazy. Like just the bare minimum things of not looking at your phone, being present with your clients, showing up on time, doing
Yeah,
an assessment, you know, uh, taking keeping track of their data. Like I was doing all these things, and that made me wow. And I was like, oh my god, that's not a great situation to be in.
being punctual and showing that you care is 50% of the battle in anything. It's
Wow,
like
absolutely.
nobody cares about how much you know, right? They care about how you make them feel. And that's a
Hmm.
big thing that I had to learn the hard way in my coaching career along the way, where I was so fixated on knowledge and, trying to just know so much information and apply things. But if you can't get good buy-in and you can't build trust with a client and you can't actually find what makes them tick, it doesn't matter how much you know, because if the buy-in's not there, you could have all this information, but you could have a client who just, purely just doesn't gel with you. And that was something that I
Hmm.
had to learn a lot coming from the military and then working back in with general population.
Mm.
Building social connections and interacting with people is 90% of the battle when you work face to face. Because
Hmm.
let's put it this way, if you're a shit person, right, and you work face to face, it doesn't matter how much you know, you're not going to build a business. You have to be a good person.
Yeah, my one of my colleagues and friends, he would use this quote: People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care."
Exactly. It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that encapsulates exactly what your insight has been. I didn't know you were in the military. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in 2009, I joined the Australian Army and I served as a rifleman in the military. I,
Oh,
yeah, so before I was a coach, before I got into coaching, I was in the military. And before I was in the military, I was a builder's apprentice. So I worked in a trade where I was on the tools, laying concrete, and I was
wow.
always physical and loved sport growing up. So I didn't have a big academic background when it came to exercise science. So when I fell in love with just being fit and wanting to train and got into CrossFit, that's why I joined the army, was to challenge myself physically and mentally. And I did. I got what I wanted out of it. I got a heap of injuries along the way. And from there, I learned more about myself in the military through any other part of my life. And it was great. It was a great
Wow.
experience. It did come with some negatives along the way, but I took them as
Hmm.
positives and I kind of grew from that. And that's what kind of pushed me into where I am now.
Hmm. What were some of the most common issues with regards to physical injuries that happen in within the military?
I mean, they vary a lot depending on your role in the military. For
Mm.
example, I was a rifleman, so I was a heavy gunner. So, what that means is I was carrying around a big machine gun with 400 rounds, which was what you were meant to carry. And you have a pack on your back, and you could be doing exercises out in the bush where you may be trekking and pack marching 5-10 kilometers here and another 5-10 kilometers there, and then you're fire and moving and you're doing drills and you're sleeping on the ground. So your back does cop a beating in that sense, and you will see a lot of
Mm.
lower back issues. You will see a lot of knee, ankle, obviously lower limb issues as well. just because people are rolling their ankles, falling in potholes, which is what happened to me during an exercise. And you will see guys twisting their knees, and when you're walking at night and the ground is uneven and you're on undulating terrain,
Oof.
you are going to be exposed to things that you can't see, and you're tired, you're fatigued, you're hungry, and that's when injuries, you're more susceptible to injury.
Hmm. Man, that's amazing. Like, I can imagine that if you would be in charge of designing the training program for the military, you would potentially do things very differently. Do you feel like they're still very old school in their physical preparation, or is it part of the mental aspect?
I mean, I haven't been around it for 14 years now.
Mm.
So
Yeah, yeah, it's been a long
I
time.
got out 14 years ago, and
Yeah,
when I was in there and I looked at the physical preparation, obviously I wasn't the coach I am now, and I didn't know what I know now.
of course.
So I was actually a combat fitness leader in there. I did a course where I was paneled.
Oh, you were?
Yes, and I would take the soldiers and captains and pretty much all our staff through sessions, through physical training. And a lot of it was, a psychological aspect. There was a lot of endurance based training, a lot of body weight training. Uh, in terms of the physical preparation of what they were doing when I was phasing out, it was starting to get really good. And they were
Hmm.
actually obviously encompassing things like your general resistance training, but they had purpose behind it where they would have structured programs that focused on building relative strength, and exposing, some of the soldiers to dynamic movement and getting them to work through, a program that had a decent split. Now, I don't know what it's like at the moment, and I do know that it has improved a lot in terms of what they were doing. And when you're working with a combat professional or just working with someone in the field like that, they kind of need to tick a lot of the boxes across the board of multiple physical qualities on that end. So you're running in boots, you're going to be doing things under fatigue, but you don't normally prepare the body to try and replicate what you're going to go through unless you're going through selection. So you want to experience what you're going to go through selection, which is special forces, for example. Now, when you're working with an individual like that, you do have to do elements that we call it specificity, where they may have to do pack marching, where we have general and specific. So, a general way of looking at physical preparation for a soldier would be doing things in the weight room that would support tissue quality, that then overall have a contribution to the specific task, right? So if they're pack marching a lot, you want to make sure that they've got, a decent amount of, lower limb strength. You want to make sure that, their foot and Achilles is strong. So you want to be exposing them to general things in the weight room like relative strength. You also want to be working on some power development because they do need to be explosive in short bursts. For example, if they're running, change of direction, whatever it may be, if they're firing, moving, if they're a tactical combat individual, you want to make sure that you're touching on all those general physical qualities. And if you look at just good training in general, a good training program should be able to touch on a multiple array of general physical qualities. The specificity is something that you sprinkle in when, let's say, a soldier has some downtime or they're training for a specific course.
Hmm. I love that. I never looked at it that way. So what you're basically saying is that, like in every physical endeavor, there is a GPP phase and an SPP, right? Like a general physical preparedness. You need to kind of be fit all around, and then the sport specific preparation comes in for the military individual, depending on the tasks or the tests that they need to go through.
That's my model. So if I was to look at an athlete
I love that. Yeah.
and I was to look at anyone in general, right? I would look at the individual first and I would identify what physical qualities are lacking in this person. Then I would look at the specific task that they want to be good at. And what are the kinematics? So if we look at the military, for example, and if this guy's going for selection, we need to look at the physical qualities and the key performance indicators and the physical testing that this individual needs to be good at. And then we need to look at the athlete and we need to bridge a gap between the two and see where the deficits are. Now, you have
Hmm.
athletes' needs, and then you have this is where the athlete falls under into their needs. And under those needs, what you're going to have is what is the training age of the athlete? What is the injury history of the athlete? How long have they been in the military, for this example? Have they, had any experience with selection in the past? What is their current performance markers at the moment now? Have they done this performance testing yet? Do you have any data to work from? So what you're doing is you're building subjective data, and you're also obviously building a framework around this individual. Then you have to look at, okay, the governing task. What is it that they want to be good at? And then underneath the task is what we call software. So the software is the actual thing that they need to be good at. In another situation, it would be the sport. So if you look at sport as you playing the game being the software, and what you do in the weight room as being the hardware, the two go hand in hand, right? So what we're using the weight room for is to improve the hardware to support the software. Now, as a coach, you
Hmm.
need to understand what actually is entailed in this particular software for this individual. And if we're looking at the military and we're looking at special forces selection and we're looking at what they need to go through in their testing, right? They have certain testing that they need to go through and pass. That testing becomes a key performance indicator. And what happens is you need to identify what physical qualities serve that purpose of key performance indicator in the weight room. And that's where you start building your hardware out. And that's where you test the athlete to see how far they are or how good they perform at that current test and where the deficits are. So what it does, it creates a roadmap of how you design your training. Without testing, you don't really have any framework to work off. So as a coach, you need to be open-minded into understanding what the software is about and then also where your current hardware sits with the athlete.
Mm. I love that. I love that analogy of software and hardware. So when you're going about your assessment, client assessment, how do you go about it depending on if you're working with general population, or maybe this question might be too broad, but so there is an assessment that you go through, an assessment process that is probably um, overarching for most human beings. And then depending on the goals and the demands of that individual, with regards to whether it's an athlete, you will make it a little bit more specific to the sport as well, right? Is that how you go about your assessment?
Of course. So just remember this, right? Any athlete or any person you're working with, regardless of the sport, first and foremost, they're a human, right? So
I love that.
they're a human first, right? And there's certain basic things that I like to see an athlete be able to perform in the weight room from a general perspective, right? Then if I was to answer your question, if I was working with someone who was just in general a hobbyist like myself who took up a combat sport later in life, and they came in and they were dealing with some knee pain and they were more of a rehab case, the physical testing that I would take them through or the movement assessment and screen that I would take them through would be very much the same as what I would take a combat sport athlete who was perfectly healthy, right? A professional athlete who was perfectly healthy. I'd still want to see general movement and relative range of motion through the body because they're a human first and foremost. Now, where it starts to differ, when you're looking at performance testing, right? So someone who's, you know, if you look at, let's say, for example, you've got a continuum, right? Someone comes into your gym and they have, a very low level of fitness because they're injured. your performance testing has to cater for where they're currently at right now. And your testing may be something different, right? It might be getting them on force plates, looking at limb asymmetry, right? So you can start to identify, asymmetrical differences between left and right sides. You may be measuring, for example, if it's a knee injury, you might be looking at isometric quad testing, right? Or you might be looking at just hip range of motion. You may be looking at the whole kinetic chain from a movement perspective. You may be looking at someone who's in mid-stage rehab. A test for them might be a 6RM Bulgarian split squat, right? Then if you've got someone on the performance end who's perfectly healthy, I'm going to take them through jump testing. I'm going to look at their throwing. I'm going to look at their upper body power testing. I'm going to try and get a full picture of the physical qualities that matter specific to the demands of their sport. And that doesn't change with any sport or any athlete. The only thing that changes is you getting, like as a coach, you have to understand the demands of the software back to the sport. So if you understand the characteristics of the sport, you can start to see what physical qualities are going to take priority in your testing. So if we're looking at a striker versus a grappler, right? Strikers predominantly taking part on the feet. There's a higher degree of ground reaction forces. There's also a higher degree of reactivity, which means that rate of force development is more on the priority list than grappling, because grappling can be predominantly taken part on the ground where they're rolling around. Let's say if it's BJJ, the demands of reactivity on the floor with the lower limb aren't as high as someone who is, boxing or kickboxing. So you're going to place a higher emphasis on that physical quality as opposed for isometric strength or endurance for grappling in that sense.
I love that. I love that you clarified it with an example between a grappler and a striker. Someone that needs to stay on their feet or someone that is rolling around on the floor, it's completely different demands on the body. Walk me through when you are going through an assessment, for example, a power assessment like throwing. Is there a couple of categories that you keep in mind, that you keep in the back of your head as you're assessing this athlete?
Yeah, for starters, like for throwing, if we're looking at rotational power and we're looking at sequencing of the kinetic chain, so from the ground up to distal structures of the body, how well does the athlete coordinate these joint actions together? You got me?
No, I didn't. Could you? You said if you're looking at a rotational, and then I didn't hear the rest.
Okay, yeah. A Riverside is, I've used it in the past and I've had my issues with it. Um, so,
Really?
yeah.
Okay.
So if we're looking at,
What are you
for
using
example,
now? Maybe I can start using it as well.
I don't run podcasts anymore. I'm going to get back into it when I get back to the
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
States. But
Yeah. You
yeah,
should.
so if we're looking at, let's say we're looking at, I wouldn't call it rotational power. What I would be looking at is an expression of rotational power. How well the athlete can express moving in the transverse plane. Now, for example, if the exercise that we're using is a med ball shot put, what we're looking at there is how well does the athlete transfer kinetic energy from the ground up into distal structures of the body, right? So we're working from proximal to distal. And if you're looking at a med ball throw, right, the way that you would measure it is you would probably use two weights. You'd probably use one at maybe 7 to 8 kilos, and then you'd probably use one at maybe 3 to 4 kilos. And the reason why you'd probably use two different weights is because they're going to use two different strategies in order to accelerate the ball. And even though you can't really measure, it's really hard to measure rotational output unless you get, there's certain things that you can use. I'm not too familiar with the technology, but I've been speaking to a sprint coach, and he's developing this bodysuit at the moment now that is pretty much going to
Oh
measure
wow.
the kinematics and kinetics surrounding
Yeah.
lifetime movement, which would give you instant feedback on how well they're rotating. So what you would do is you would measure the distance that the ball lands. How far can they throw the
Mm-hmm.
ball, right? It kind of it limits the testing, but then you also need to use your coach's eye on how well they're actually, sequencing things together, right? The further the ball
Mm-hmm.
goes, right? The further the ball goes, the more power is being produced, right? The more power they've pushed
Yeah,
into the floor
absolutely.
to transfer kinetic energy into the distal target, right? It's the same with punching
Mm-hmm.
power, right? The higher the ground reaction force, the harder you can push into the ground, more force you can transfer into the ground and transfer that kinetic energy back up through the lower limbs, into the hips, into the spine, into the trunk. The hand is just a byproduct of that velocity. So the more efficient you can coordinate those lower limbs, and the higher degree of force expression you can obviously produce, you are going to have a harder punch. And that's just a byproduct of how well you've done everything up until that point. So if we use a ball in this instance and the ball travels a certain distance, you could argue that, okay, he threw the ball further than someone else, therefore he's expressed a whole lot more power. Then again, you also need to look at this, the weight and momentum of the individual, right? So the heavier someone is, the more momentum they can produce. So therefore, it may take them a longer time to accelerate the ball, but they threw it further. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because we can't measure it. The time it takes to reach peak power, time it takes to reach peak velocity, right? Time to peak velocity is pretty much what we want to look at in that instance. Now, it's very hard to measure that when you don't have the technology. So what we need to look at is we need to go, okay, what is the biggest contributor to the moving in a transverse plane, or if we're looking at rotational power, what is the biggest key contributor there? We know that ground reaction forces and being able to apply force into the ground efficiently is going to be number one, because the transfer of kinetic energy in rotational actions starts from the athlete pushing into the floor. So if you can get them better at pushing into the floor, accepting, overcoming, and redirecting energy with the lower limb, you know that you're going to have some positive outcome when it comes to generating
Mm.
rotational torque or throwing a ball in the transverse plane.
Wow, I love this perspective because no one has ever laid it out through a kind of biomechanic lens, and it makes total sense. So we went kind of straight into a very specific part of your assessment, and because of that, I would like to take a step back. And so let's say there's a combat athlete who is a kickboxer, and he would like to start working with you. Would you be open to walk us through the assessment process that you have in place to assess where that athlete is?
Yeah, okay. So it's really hard. So if it depends on the context of the athlete,
Oh yeah.
right? Are they injured
Oh,
or are they
okay.
coming in
So
perfectly
he's a
healthy?
hobbyist. Okay, so that's absolutely true. Sorry, I should have specified that. So it's a kickboxer who's gonna have his first fight. He's been kickboxing for 3 years. He's healthy, no injuries.
Hmm. Okay, so obviously, like any assessment, I'd still take him through a general screen. So I'd want to see how he moves,
Okay.
right? Just from a general perspective of how I'm going to design his physical training, right? What exercise selection is going to work for this individual to get the most juice out of his program. So how he squats, how he hinges, like what limitations he may have in movement capacity will dictate the exercise selection I'd
Hmm.
use in his program. From there, I'll
Okay.
obviously, once I've assessed how they
So
move, and
if it's okay, let's go into that general screening that you have in place. Is there? Do you start basically from the? So sorry to interrupt you. It was a
yeah,
bit delayed, so I didn't hear that you were speaking. Is there a kind of process that you have with your general screening? Do you start from the feet up, or what's your approach for your general screening? Which movements are you looking at?
Yeah. So basically, I use a top-down screen, and I pretty much talk about this in my seminars and workshops. So I don't know if you know, but we run workshops where I take coaches through my assessment process and teach them how to choose exercise selection based on what you're
Amazing. I
seeing.
didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's something I'm going to do in Dubai. So I don't know if you've heard of Level Up Gym.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, I have. Really
Okay,
nice
so
gym. Big
yeah,
facility.
yeah. So I know the owner there. I met the owner, and I'm looking at running a workshop there in Dubai.
Oh, amazing. I'll definitely sign up for it.
Yeah. So just to answer your question, yeah. So basically, I will take them through just a squat assessment, a toe touch. It depends on where they're really
Yeah.
struggling. For example, so if they are someone
Mm-hmm.
who's dealing with an upper limb injury, I would spend more time in the assessment there. If there's someone dealing with a lower limb injury, I would spend more time obviously there. Now, if there's someone who's perfectly healthy, I would still look at using those tests across the board of just a squat and a toe touch, right? That they're going to be your big key
Absolutely.
markers
So
on identifying.
I love that. So you're basically looking at passive range of motion and then also through the movement. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yeah, so I look at passive and active, right? Now,
Yeah.
generally speaking, I've been coaching a long time, so a lot of coaches don't use a passive assessment, but I use a passive assessment a lot with individuals who, for example, I had a client, a kickboxer. I just did a post on him the other
Mm-hmm.
day. I was in Dubai and I assessed him, and he had a meniscus tear.
With the elbow issue.
Yeah, he had an
Meniscus
elbow.
tear. Okay.
Well, he had a bicep tendon rupture, and he tore his meniscus. Right.
Oof.
So when I assessed him, I was working with him online, but I couldn't get my hands on him because I was online. So I was in Dubai and I caught up with him and we did a PT session together. And I took him through just a passive assessment. And there was about 20 degrees difference in hip internal rotation from left to right sides. And you could see that. And you could see that in his squat. There was a massive hip hike on that side. And you know, generally speaking, we're asymmetrical human beings, and normally, you know, would I worry about asymmetry so much? Probably not, right? I wouldn't be so fixated on it, and it wouldn't have to look perfect. However, if you're someone who's had a pre-existing injury and there's deficits on that side, you probably want to address the kinetic chain. You want to look at the foot, you want to look at the hip, and you want to make sure that okay, I'm bridging the gap as close as I can, not just from force output, from a movement output as well, right? Because the way that they apply force, right, is one thing, and then the results they produce is another thing. So how they apply the force and how they get the numbers is just as important as what numbers they're putting up. Now, you're never going to be symmetrical,
Mm-hmm.
right? The goal is to kind of go, okay, what's an acceptable range for what this individual needs to do? And how are they actually executing tasks under load, under velocity, so that you can kind of go, okay, this individual's in a good ballpark now, or we need to spend more time on building capacity in certain areas. So I use a passive assessment for that. And then, generally speaking, if there is some form of lack of relative range of motion between left and right sides, and there's a big discrepancy, when you take them through an active test, right, you will normally see that deficiency shine. It'll come through into fruition when you put them into a position like a bilateral movement.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love that. So you're taking into consideration passive range of motion, and then let's say you notice that that athlete is lacking hip internal rotation. Maybe you let them do some squats and some lunges and see how that transfers as he moves. And then you notice if that transfers to movement. Yeah.
Well, you're noticing if there's a correlation, right? You're noticing, okay, there's there's difference between passive and active, right? But you're going to see compensatory
Mm-hmm.
patterns take place if there is a lack of relative range of motion. Now, if someone wants to move better and someone is just generally looking to do things well in the weight room, being able to bend your knee really well and being able to flex your hip really well is the basics that most people struggle with, right? I, Show me a good hip
Mm-hmm.
hinge. A good hip hinge will fix a lot of people's problems. So I think that,
Mm-hmm.
just really looking at those patterns and doing a really good job of improving those patterns, you'll find that these individuals get more mobile everywhere else.
I would be curious to understand how you go about, let's say in this case with the athlete lacking hip internal rotation, how you go about improving range of motion. Do you use which kind of principles do you use? Do you use passive stretching? Do you use PNF stretching?
So I use a combination, right? So, for example, you want to use an exercise or a constraint that allows the athlete to achieve a better position under load, right? So when you
Okay, could you explain that to me?
so for example, if someone
Yeah.
wants to improve, let's say their squat depth, right? And what's coupled below parallel? What are some things that we see in a squat below parallel? What has to take place at the hip and the pelvis, right? So we know that at parallel, the hip is going to experience the most amount of internal rotation. So if we want someone to perhaps, depending on their archetype, how they're built, right? Depending on their genetics and are they a wider or a narrower individual, they're both going to have different strategies of how they squat. Longer femurs versus shorter femurs, they do have biases towards certain movement strategies that we need to respect. Now, certain individuals like myself who are wider are not great squatters. Now, for someone like me, I would like to position the bar in front of my body because it allows me to kind of sit back and shift my center of mass back so that I can bring my bum closer to my heels. So if I want to have more of a vertical translation of my pelvis moving up and down, I need a weight in front of my body to do that, pulling me forward so I can sit back to do that. Now, coupling that with a bit of a heel raise, right, which is a constraint, and the way that you position the bar is a constraint, will allow me to get into deeper hip flexion and external rotation, which means that I can get into a better position and a deeper position for whatever it is I'm trying to achieve, right? If I want to get an individual, let's say, for example, I want them to improve their guard retention or their guard position in BJJ, they are going to experience that amount of hip flexion and external rotation from sitting on the ground and just doing the sport. So if I want to improve their ability to get into those positions, I may do it with an anterior loaded squat. That's one example.
Like, for example, a front squat or a Zercher squat?
Pretty much. Or a belt squat,
Mm-hmm. Nice.
a
Okay.
goblet squat.
So, okay. Yeah. So general screening is done. Then what's the next step for you when assessing the athlete?
Okay, so general screening
Do
is
you?
done, and then if they're perfectly healthy, I would take them through performance testing. So I would do some jump testing, and after I went into some jump
Mm-hmm.
testing, looking at rate of force development, I'd probably do some single leg, double leg, vertical, horizontal, maybe even some transverse plane, some frontal plane work, and then I would move into strength testing and endurance testing. So I would just look at what is their
Okay.
relative. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. With the power testing, because I'm very fascinated by that right now. Could you walk me through a couple of the assessments that you do and what they mean, and if you have any specific standards that you put in place depending on the sport? Like, for example, a kickboxer should be able to, or is it relative to body weight, etc.?
Yeah, so with the testing that I use, sorry, there's a fly in here. Um,
Yeah.
so with the testing that I use now, I don't state there should be arbitrary numbers that an athlete should be able to produce, right? But there are
Mm,
certain markers that we look at, like a reactive strength index, right? RSI. How well can they
okay.
recouple energy, right? How well can they, jump off a box and then be reactive off the floor, right? You might look at a broad
So
jump test.
could you, yeah, sorry, could you, because I have no knowledge of reactive strength index, could
Mate,
you
you should sign up to
elaborate on
my
it a little bit
you
more?
should you should sign up to my mentorship.
Oh, I didn't know you had a mentorship.
Yeah, so we
You got to
got it.
promote it a bit more, man.
Yeah, I know. I just haven't promoted it. So yeah, I'm too
Yeah,
busy on
yeah,
one-on-one coaching. So
yeah. I
yeah,
can. I see it, man. I see it.
yeah. So if you want to run through that, let me know after this call, and I'll work something out with you.
Absolutely, I would love to. I really want to up my game in that department.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, yeah, so I mean that's something we can talk about in the mentorship if you want. In terms of your
Okay,
audience, what you think your
for sure.
audience would love to hear. Uh, let's talk more about what you think they would be interested in.
Yes, absolutely. So look. For me, I'm working. So what I'm really fascinated by is this. My background was CrossFit for a very long time, and in that, the reason why I started CrossFit was because I love the idea of developing general physical preparedness. So being able to get fit across the board and be ready for anything, right? Then I realized that the methodology itself wasn't really suitable for that outcome. Like, it got me really good at work capacity, but I didn't necessarily become more athletic, more powerful, more coordinated, or anything like that. So now what my goal is to learn what we can take from athletic training and how we can apply that to the everyday person to improve their general physical preparedness and longevity. So with regards to power, everyone needs power, and now research is coming out saying that we're actually losing a very high percentage of power as we're aging, even more than muscle mass. So, how would you go about introducing power training, plyometrics, ballistics to the everyday person, and which prerequisite need to be in place, or what's your perspective on that?
Okay, so if you want to improve, obviously, reactive strength, which is a quality that does decline with age fast, you've got to obviously it's context
Which
dependent.
is, could you define? Sorry, could you kind of explain what
It's
reactive
just a
strength is
it's just a
and how it
term.
will? Yeah.
It's just a term for example, it's all strength, right? So when we look at reactive strength, and an example of that would be like a plyometric, how well someone can actually be reactive off the floor, right? That's just a simple example of it. Like it might be, if you're looking at it from an exercise prescription, right? Reactive strength would be like Olympic lifting, ballistic training, plyometrics. It would be anything to do with recoupling energy at really high velocities.
So is it like, for example, you stand on a small box and then you jump off and then you jump up
Yeah, no, no. So you're getting
the
the
speed off the
RSI,
floor?
you're getting the RSI
Ah,
confused with reactive strength, right? Reactive strength
okay.
is
So
is
reactive
just a
strength is a
term.
general.
It's just a term.
It's a category.
Yeah. Well, it's like let's call it a physical quality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So let's call it that, and then let's call like the methods that you use to improve that physical quality. Okay. So the
Yeah.
methods that you use would be like moving submaximal loads at high velocity. It would be ballistic training. It would be plyometrics, right? You could also do things like overcoming isometrics, isometric rate of force development, right? where you're getting a lot of motor units recruiting at a really fast rate. So they're just methods of how you could improve that physical quality. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how you do this with a general population client, it's always going to be context dependent on the individual and their current capacity. And this is why you need an exercise continuum list of certain exercises are going to be harder than others. Certain exercises are going to demand more of the body than others. So that's why it's important to have a progression model that you can draw from, or a toolbox that you can draw from, to have a simple introduction to teaching someone how to recouple energy and how to jump. Or, for example, you know, getting them, moving submaximal loads at high velocity, or getting them exposed to ballistic training.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's relevant for the everyday person to be exposed to power training?
Absolutely. As a general program, yes. I believe that a good program should touch on multiple physical qualities. There should be a blend of
Mm-hmm.
everything throughout the week. Now, the issue is it depends on what you want to be good at, right? Because if you want to be good at certain things and what the goal, and obviously have specific goals, you're going to prioritize certain physical qualities over others. Now, it's really hard to build all qualities at once. It just means that certain qualities that you value will be prioritized so that you can build them while others are being maintained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. What's next for you? Like, tell the audience what you're up to right now. What are the where they can find you? What you're doing? What are
Yeah.
all the ways that you're working with people?
Okay. Well, I've just released a elbow program, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a fantastic program. I put my heart and soul into. It's a 2 day a week program for anyone who's dealing with medial and lateral elbow pain, and it's delivered on Thinkific, and it was the first time using Thinkific, which I really enjoyed.
Oh,
And
cool.
it's almost like a little course as well as a program. I also run Combat Sports Performance, which is an online subscription model for fighters, grapplers of all walks of life who just want access to good physical preparation. And I have obviously one-to-one online coaching. That's my main business. That's where people come to work with me directly for anyone dealing with complex rehab cases and they need help getting back to performance. That's pretty much where I spend most of my time. And then lastly, I'm looking to take on 5 PT sessions in Dubai. So only 5 sessions. It won't be cheap, but I've taken on 5 sessions where I want to work with either complex cases or cases that I find interesting, to help people, reach a high level of performance, whether they're in general population or they're a combat sport athlete or any athlete in general. That's what I'm looking to do when I get to Dubai, and then also looking at getting this workshop and seminar and mentorship going.
Wow.
There's a
Sounds
lot.
like you need a team, bro.
I actually
Yeah,
do.
I love
So
it. I love it. You're
working
yeah.
16 hours a day.
Oh my god. Respect. Respect. Yeah. Um yeah, dude, thank you so much for your time. I really really appreciate it. Love what you're doing, and I can't wait to meet you in person and attend one of your workshops here in Dubai. And I am 100% sure Dubai is gonna be amazing for you and your family, and it's gonna take you to new heights.
Mate, we'll catch up for sure. Thank you for having me on. And
Yeah,
yeah, I can't
thank you
wait.
so much.
And we'll definitely catch up in Dubai.
Absolutely, for sure. So I just stopped the record.
Yeah, yeah, I can hear now. Yeah.